3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, where we explore strategies for training, competing, and well-being shared through experiences from some of the sharpest minds in the fitness space. Now, welcome your host, Micah Shoemaker.
I always appreciate you getting on here. I don't remember what episode or what number, but I'll put it for people that are going to listen. I'll put it down in the description because we're probably not going to I feel like that episode was like a coming of age episode where we talked about how you got to where you were. And for me, that was really cool because I didn't realize that you were a great golfer. And I thought about
at
you
one
last
time.
weekend. Yeah, well, I thought about you last weekend because I was playing golf. And I played 9 holes. I hadn't played in forever. I took lessons as a young kid for years. Ended up kind of made a decision to play baseball because it didn't make sense to do both. It jacked up my swing. And anyways, I the best I got was a bogey, and I was on a hole, and I was like, man, I am terrible at this. I see why people quit this thing. I see why people just kind of play and drink and smoke cigars, because I was throwing clubs on hole 3. I was throwing them. I'm just going to admit it. I was like, I want to go back to CrossFit. I'm not going to say the words I was saying because I was just letting them fly. And prior to that, it's funny because prior to that, I talk about expectations. Prior to that, I was like, man, this is going to be great. I haven't played another sport, quote unquote, other than CrossFit in a while. This is going to be good. There's no pain in this. There's no thrusters in this. I was excited, genuinely. The people I was going with were good people, all better than me. And I was like, this is going to be great. And I got there, and I hated every second of it because they were beating me, and I'm competitive, and I hate losing. I hate losing more than I like winning. And so it was a terrible experience. So kudos to you for being good at golf, because now I went home. I told my wife, I was like, we're about to invest 10 grand. All right, we're about to invest in clubs and lessons. And I was like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of being bad. And she was like, it was 9 holes. Do you need to see a therapist? And I was like, maybe. So anyway.
Yeah, save that 10 grand. Definitely.
Put it in Botox or something, at least I can look better. Anyway.
Yeah.
Wow, we've
that's
really
great.
gone off the rails. We've really gone off the rails. I just had to tell somebody that, and I thought of you. I was like, you know what? I'm having my convo with Sam, and I was like, I remember him telling me about golf, and I said, you know what? That's where I'll start with him. I'll start with my terrible experience. I'm just curious, and then we can get into CrossFit, and we can actually get started with this. But I'm just curious. Do you play anymore? Do you even have time for that?
Well, I think I've played 4 times this year, and it's December.
Okay, so
I don't play much.
So not a lot.
Yeah, it's just not. It's funny when you have to pay for. When you have to pay to play, when you have to pay for golf balls, you have to pay for new clubs, and then when you have to give 4 hours of your time, it's is that really worth it? And so for me, it's just at this stage, it's not worth the financial cost, and it's not worth the time cost. It's just not. But maybe in the next chapter, but it's fine. It doesn't bother me. I've kind of moved away from that chapter into this, the new chapter of coaching and working with our team. But it's still fun. I like when I do go out, it's a lot of fun. And thankfully I can enjoy it and be appreciative of the level and ability I got to, because I'll have certain shots and 10 years ago, I could have hit that shot easily without even a second thought. Whereas now I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I need to do to hit this? And then I hit it and it's horrible. I'm like, oh man, that was really bad. And then I just laugh at myself, but I have a good time. And, if you're going to spend 4 hours of your day, I hope you have a good time. If you don't, then, got to do something else. So yeah, don't play it much. But when I do, it's a lot of fun, and I'm still decent enough to where I'll be better than probably most people I play with, but definitely very far removed from my former glory.
You brought up something there, and this is always what I love about you is when I get the chance to talk to you is that things that you say are very intuitive, and you can tell you're very in touch with the way that you feel. And I don't mean that in like a weird, mushy way. I just mean like you're just a better way of saying it was you. I perceive you as someone that has a lot of self-awareness, and I admire that. And one of the things that you said is in this season of life, and I realize, and it's interesting that you use, it's very nuanced. And I see a lot of people, whether coming into or out of sport, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, obviously, because that's most of the people listening are interested in the sport of fitness. It's interesting to see how if someone doesn't change their identity to become the type of person that does this thing, it's amazing to me, and I know because you coach so many people, it's amazing to me the lack of success they're already going to have. And for people listening, that might sound a little weird, but I find the people that identify themselves as this is almost who I am, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, because you hear a lot of, we'll call them gurus, just to put a broad name on it, that say, your identity has to be more than that. But I'm curious, when you're coaching people and you're trying to help them express their highest potential in sport, in this case, the sport of fitness, how do you have that conversation with them? Is it a conversation that you have?
You're right that if you're not cognizant of what chapter of life you're in, and let's say the identity that's centered in that chapter, you will self-sabotage yourself. You will limit the possibilities you can get out of that chapter. So I think it's important for people to create some space to think about, okay, what chapter am I in, and what's the main narrative of this chapter? Is this the chapter of athletic, professional athlete Sam, or is this now coach, learning, developing career chapter Sam, or is this husband, father, family man chapter, so on and so forth? So with my clients, there's definitely conversation around bringing some awareness, like, okay, where are we at right now? Like, where are you at with what you're doing and where we're going? And maybe something that would tie in nicely to this is helping people once they've finished that athletic chapter, because as I'm sure you've seen with your own work as a coach,
yeah,
people will continue the athletic chapter of life after college sports or high school sports, and CrossFit becomes a very nice gateway to continue that chapter, because you're not ready to start a new one. Like, you haven't, one, maybe you haven't had any role models, or two, you've only known yourself to be the athlete, so you don't have the scaffolding to come up with a new chapter persona. And so that's a hard transition, and I've had a lot of conversations with people on that, and I think I've been fortunate that I've gone through that myself, so I have experience to help people chat and dialogue on it so that they can feel at peace and come up with a strategy and plan to close that chapter, start a new chapter, whether it's with work, their family, a new, whatever it might be. So to the main point you brought up, I think when people are very clear in knowing, well, what chapter of life is this, you can then become a lot more aligned. If you're a lot more aligned, you can create systems and habits that build momentum to allow yourself the most success possible in that chapter, such that when the time comes to shift, you can probably leave it on a really good note. So yeah, it's a very interesting part of life that doesn't get discussed. Is, I like framing it like with a book in different chapters. I think that makes a lot of sense to people. Like, okay, yeah, I had this chapter, now I'm in this chapter, and then I'm going to go to this next chapter. So yeah, it's very helpful to create space to dive into that for yourself and for those that you work with.
the mental imaging of scaffolding is one that's very interesting to me because I think a lot of times, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I think sometimes when I'm making a transition in my life, I view it as one that may not, at first at least, may not be one that's quote leveling up. And I think is like people that are in constant pursuit, this perpetual pursuit of progress and being a better version of themselves in some shape or form. And I think at the heartbeat, that's really what CrossFit, not necessarily the sport, but maybe the modality, in my opinion, that's what it embodies. It's yes, there's that health component, but what it truly embodies to me, and I think it's different for every person, what it truly embodies for me and to me is this pursuit of that, who I am today can be better, and it will be better. And this little bit of discipline in my life, this little daily habit that I have, that's my training or my working out with my community is a part of that pursuit to be a little bit better. Now, as it relates to sport and prize and winning, because that's what sport is, let's be honest, right? That's where it becomes very interesting to me, because we live our lives, and think about it, even from like an educational standpoint, we're graded. We have A's, we have B's, we have C's, all the way to F's, which quite literally mean failure. So we're told and this is a big topic I'm getting into here, but we're told from a very early age, this is the win column and this is the loser column. Now, I'm using my own terminology for the sake of the conversation. Others may have theirs, but nevertheless, we can all agree that an A is better than an F. I think that's a universal truth we can all agree upon. And so what I'm saying is, well, now here's the winner column and here's the loser column, right? And we proceed with that thought process. We proceed with that process through sport. It is very clear. There's a scoreboard, and there's a winner and there's a loser at the end of the game. Imagine playing a sport and there's no scoreboard. That would be it would be irrational. It would be pointless, right?
It's not a sport then. It's just a game,
right?
But it's an infinite game. The one that you try to.
It's an infinite game.
Yeah, that's a James Carr's idea. Finite versus infinite.
Yes,
yeah.
It is. Simon Sinek wrote a great book on it as well. So the point I'm making is this: is we have this like almost this evolution model that we're given from a very young age of there's winners, and there's losers, there's hey, you failed at this and A plus, gold star. Yet when we get out of that, we get out of college, maybe we do the little CrossFit thing for a while, and we go, okay, spoiler alert, not going to be Matt Frazier, don't have those genetics. Not going to be Tia Toomey, don't have those genetics. Okay, now transition. Where am I? And it's like, holy cow, that scoreboard all of a sudden, and I see you shaking your head, all of a sudden there is none. There is no winners and losers. There is no time to complete. There is no rounds plus reps. It's very, I beat you, you beat me. No, very different. There is no sugar wad for that. So I'm not sponsored by them, but it should be. Anyways, so look, the point is this, is how, I'm just curious, how do you go about that? Like in your brain, how are you computing that and thinking about, okay, well, what does that transition look like? I mean, you went through it to some extent, right? You played golf, you did the CrossFit route. Now you're coaching at a very high level. I mean, help me understand that.
Well, I think it comes back to defining success for yourself, because at the young age, success is, well, institutionally defined for you, which is the grading scale, and there's a lot of crap inside of the education system, but that's not, that's outside of my scope of understanding, so we're not even going to go there. But at a young age, your scale for identifying success and failure is predetermined, and then as you kind of get older, it can become more loosely defined, or it becomes more strictly defined if you're inside the the if you're inside the game of a sport, or maybe a corporation or business that's very hierarchical, where there is like either you're growing or you're not, or maybe you surround yourself with people who are like that. So it will depend on what environment you're in and what it's going to breed in you. And so if you are a competitive athlete, or you're pursuing like this like CrossFit, you're inside of a game that is going to objectively tell you whether or not you're good or you're not good, and if you're getting better, if you're not getting better. Now, as you get older, or let's say you move past that chapter, you will get to a point where you have to come up with your own definition of success and your own definition of what is worthy with what you're doing with your time and your energy. So that's where you have to start thinking for yourself. Okay, well, what do I want? What's important to me? What's going to provide meaning and value based off what I believe? And so that's ideally where then you start thinking or spending your time figuring out, so that you can then kind of reverse engineer, well, what's the plan I need to create that environment or that life? And so like for myself, I've always wanted to have a family, have children, continue kind of the legacy of the family I was raised in. And so if I want a wife, if I want kids, I have to be able to support them. I have to, have things in place that would have some other person want to be with me and marry me. Like I have to have what is required, such that a woman's gonna be like, oh yeah, I would definitely want to marry this guy and be his wife, and support him and raise children with him. So then you start thinking to yourself, okay, well then what do I need to have to make myself a really good catch, because I can't just do it with smiles and jokes. That only gets you so far. So then you start, you reverse engineer. It's like, okay, well then I got to do all these things. And so now I'm putting together like, okay, well, what does success mean, for me based on what I want. And so that's something that I'll talk to clients about. Now, again, it depends what age you're at, because if you're talking to a 30-year-old male or female, it's a very different conversation, even the male and the female conversation, versus if they're 22 or 23. Because when you're 22 or 23, you just want to win and kill everyone, and that's fine. So different conversations, different phases of life. But part of it is getting to the scary part, where you have to kind of come up with your own definition of an A and an F, and then you have to hold yourself kind of accountable to that as time goes on. You don't have somebody else telling you, was that an A or was that an F? Maybe there are circumstances where that's the case, but I think that's what you're trying to get to in life, is to the point where you're guiding your ship and determining if you need to head east or if you need to head more west. And if you go the wrong direction, then you take responsibility to course correct. And I think, that maybe allows you to feel more responsible, and what you're doing has a little bit more purpose behind it.
I definitely think you're onto something there about it makes you feel more responsible. I find in my own life that the more responsibility I take, the more power I have. And it's contrary to the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I've always disagreed with that fundamentally. I truly believe it's the opposite. You cannot have great power without great responsibility. And so if I can take so much responsibility over my life, it's nobody else's fault. I have a lot of power over my life. Yet what tends to happen to a lot of people, I know I found myself in this boat, is I tend to point the finger because it's easier, right? It's, well, this was the reason, or make the excuse, right? And so how I look at that in my own brain is in my own self-reflection time, or at least what I try to do is try to hone in those moments, because what I end up realizing is that I'm really just giving my power away, and it's the opposite of what I hope to do, which is, create a tremendous amount of meaning for my life. And I find that when you're deeply responsible for something or for someone, it's a weird thing. By default, it creates that meaning. It's like, I'll give a great example of this, one that I know you can relate to. It's like when you're dating someone, there's some responsibility. Of course there is, and I would even argue it's a hierarchical form of responsibility. It's like not all responsibility is created equal. You could argue this point with really, really simple. I have a hamster I need to keep alive. I have a child I need to keep alive. Look, Peter, I don't need you coming after me, but like we get the point. I would argue that the child's life has more intrinsic value, this is my opinion, than the hamster's life. All right. I also birthed the thing, came from, my being, right? So like it's right. So now we started getting some of that. And so, when you get married, right. And it's like, okay, well now I'm not just trying to put food, quote unquote, food on the table for me. I'm also trying to do it for my wife. There's this responsibility. And I think specifically as males, and I can't speak for the female race as a whole. And I've found that during marriage, it's a very idea to speak as the female race because or the female gender rather, because you're just not going to get it right ever. So it's okay to just say, I don't know. And say, honey, I would love to hear your opinion. But the point is, as a guy in particular, and maybe this is the way that we're biologically wound up in the brain, but there's this grave responsibility that I feel to provide. And like the decisions that I make, I realize, no, they don't just affect me, that they now affect someone else. And that by me doing something or not doing something or making a change in my life or bringing it back to the very first of our conversation, switching seasons, transitioning seasons, now affects somebody else. I think that's why it's easier to make, for example, it's easier to make these transitions and changes when I'm 22 versus I'm 32 and I have a kid and a wife. Well, and that goes back to the more responsibility you have, the more power you have, which is very counterintuitive in my mind when you begin to think about it.
Yeah, no, I see it very similarly. Responsibility is a good thing. You definitely want more of that over time. Less is not. Less is not good.
Leads to meaning.
Yeah.
You
can draw a line.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm curious for you as you've recently gotten married. Congratulations on that, by the way. And I've always wondered, why do we say congratulations when people get married? I wonder if that's just like the nice thing to do, or if we're like, hey, you were finally acceptable enough to another human. So congrats for being an acceptable.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? I've never thought about that until now.
Yeah.
I was like, why do I say that?
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with James Fitzgerald one day, and he stopped me. He was like, why do you say that? I was like, I've never thought about that. I've never thought, and ever since that conversation, I've just started asking myself why I say certain things. So anyways, here nor there. I'm curious, what have you, because you've been married how long?
7 months, about 7 months. So not even a year.
What have you learned? What have you learned in the first 7 months of marriage?
Yeah. Well, to your first point, because I actually, funny enough, I had some clients who, when I mentioned I was getting married, actually said, "Oh, I'm sorry." They said that, and
awesome.
And I was like, "Oh, wow!" It's kind of taken back, and they obviously did not have a good experience with marriage, and so that has, of course, painted their perception of that, idea. So, which they shared with me, and so I was like, okay, then I could see why you would say that. I think maybe when people do say congratulations, it's partly because they understand they understand the inherent value in a union with a partner, and in this case with the opposite sex, and that there's great value and responsibility and meaning and love that is expressed through that union, and you can't replicate it outside of that union, in my opinion. So I think because you and I view that in the same light and this with the same amount of reverence to it, then it's easy to say to someone like, yeah, congratulations, because it's a beautiful thing. But if you don't look at it the same way, then you might just say it just to be, cordial, but deep down you don't really, there's nothing really behind it when you say it. It's just being, just being respectful to the person or something. That would be my little take on it. Because if somebody was newly married, I would say it. Like, I had a client, he recently got engaged. Actually, two of them recently got engaged, and I was like over the moon for them because I was like, "This is amazing. You're moving yourself in the right direction, because it's going to really draw a lot out of you that you can't draw out of if you're single or if you just serial date people." We could go off on a tangent of how important marriage is, and again, maybe it's not for everyone, but you can't ignore the value inside of that that idea, and the idea of a union with someone. And at the end of the day, we're humans, we procreate. Maybe we shouldn't go off on that tangent, but you need a partner.
That's okay.
You need a partner.
Yeah.
But to your question,
it
though,
still only works one way. Yeah. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yes. So what have I learned? This is a really good question, because people have asked me this a lot. And one thing, I'd say probably the biggest thing is just learning how to communicate better when you have, as simple as that sounds, because when you live with someone, you have to learn to compromise, and you have to learn how to listen more effectively. You have to learn how to put your ego aside more. You can't distance yourself if something's off, or they say something that you don't like, or they do something you don't like, because they're going to be right there. And if you try to put it off, or you try to distance yourself, it's going to come back even bigger down the road with something else, and then you're going to really have a problem. So it's really made me have to become more patient and just patient with things. And that's been great for even my coaching practice, because you learn to be patient with your clients, and you learn how to maybe communicate a little bit more effectively with them. You also learn how to empathize with your clients who are married, and you can understand what they go through or the challenges they face. And if they bring those things up in conversations, it's easier to speak on it, because 2 years ago, I wouldn't have as much. I want to say guidance, because it's not guidance, but I wouldn't be able to empathize with them, because I just didn't understand that. And same with the children. Like, once we have children, then I can understand where they're coming from with those challenges they face. So those have been the biggest learnings thus far. But the communication's been tremendous, and we're in the business of communicating, so it's definitely been a value add for my practice.
Yeah, I'm chuckling, giggling over here, because that's what I would say. I mean, it really is. Been married 2 years in January 2nd, so
Awesome.
Coming up on our anniversary, and yeah, man, it really has been. It's been awesome, and that's 100% what I would say. It's like, you don't realize how selfish you really are until you're living with someone, and then you realize you are I am, so I'll use myself, I am an incredibly selfish human being. And you don't ever, like, no one ever sits down and is like, I'm really selfish. And it's like, no one ever says that. But you get married, and then, to your point, you can't go run away. You can't go, well, I'm just going to go to my place. Or like, there is none of that. It's like, no, we're going to sleep 3 feet from each other in about, 45 minutes. It's like, there is none of that. So you're forced to have really tough conversations. And what you begin to learn, what I've begun to learn how to do, is you start to realize this person grew up differently than I did. Yes, we share a lot of the same values, and hopefully, I mean, I'm not giving relationship advice, but from what I've gathered is, hopefully, when you're going through those things, you talk about your values, you talk about, your what's meaningful to you, what what you believe your purpose is in life, and all those things that hopefully will allow you to align on a lot of things, important things. I think that's helpful, and quite necessary. With that being said, you still realize this person was raised potentially in a different state than me, with different parents than me. Maybe the parents believe differently, right? Like it's all these different confluences of things. And you begin to realize I've got to seek to understand these things. Because if I don't, and I just say, you know what, it doesn't really matter that you think this because I think this. And we could talk about that in as it relates to like our coaching practice. And it's even, look, I think about it all the time because it's super relevant. I coach out of the, 30 or so clients that I have, I coach 80% women.
Wow.
I didn't plan it that way. It's just the way that it is. It's just, those are the numbers. And so what I've realized is, hey, I have to communicate to them a lot different than I do to my 22-year-old male that I love it said, who just wants to like go out and kill it and kill everyone. It's just very different. And I think it's a master class in communication. It's a master class in empathy. I don't think it's for everyone. I'm not pushing it on everyone. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just merely saying that it will teach you things about yourself that you never knew. And that, if you allow it, can be valuable.
100%. I was going to ask you, because I know you coach your wife, how's that dynamic comparative to your marriage dynamic? Like, how do you guys separate that? How do you, because she's done well, and it looks like you guys have done well from the outside. So how has that been?
Yeah, for sure. Just a quick 20-second backstory. I was really proud of her last year. She ties for 11th at Granite Games in a field that I know you're aware had 8 previous games athletes in. First year at a semifinal. So I've been coaching her for 2 years, and we didn't make it the year before. Very, very close. And, we both had a hard look in the mirror of, hey, we want to do this as a team. This is how we want to live our lives. It's how we're going to change our lives again, that whole communication thing. And we just literally sat down and said, hey, this is going to be what we're going to do. She's going to change jobs. She's going to do this. We literally, not figuratively, literally revolve our life around from the fact that we've spent a lot of money in our basement to have a gym and everything that she needs and all the pieces of equipment that she could possibly need. We've literally revolved our life around both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially around doing the sport of fitness. And it's, I wouldn't have it any other way because I love it. And I don't know, part of me, it's like an exhilarating thing that I get off on, like not in a weird way, just like it's exhilarating to do. I love sport. Maybe that's just being a guy with testosterone. I don't know. But back to your question though, how has it been? It's a really weird line, right? Because I'm married to her, so I'm with her almost all the time. Yet there is a line where, and she says this to me, she's like, I need husband Micah, not coach Micah. And she'll say that to me, and she'll autocorrect me because sometimes the line gets really blurry. And I am not raising my hand to the audience members saying, I do it the best. You should follow me for my Tony Robbins marriage advice. Okay. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm very much figuring it out. And it takes a lot of constant, perpetual communication to do so. I will say this, though. It's very rewarding. She happens to be very coachable. She's played, she was a great athlete in college. She played D1 sports. She's coachable. She's a coachable person, and I don't think you get to that level and have the success that she had without being an iota coachable, and so she is, and that's fun. But it's hard because the conversations we have, just like any athlete and any coach relationships, requires very hard conversations about where you are and where you need to be, the expectation gap, as I call it. And those conversations are hard, but I found that just like any relationship, so freaking cliche, I get it, but if you don't have a base level of trust, in like very basic, like you're a good person, I'm a good person, okay, that's one level, but then it's, okay, I trust in your process and you're trusting in my hard work, right? And so there's different levels of that trust that you start to begin to build. And throughout that process, I believe, and just like with any coaching practice, hopefully you've got different levels of trust, and over the years you continue to build that up. Oh, and ultimately, I think we've done a really good job of that. And so now I can tell her straight up, and I say it just like this. I'm like, that was terrible. Like, your effort was bad. Like, where do you think, this could have gone better? Like, this was my perception. It was bad effort, if it was this or that. And it's very just matter of fact. And that's how she wants to be coached. She's a very blunt, like, tell it to me like it is. Please don't sugarcoat me. I don't have time for this. And it's very weird because people hear us interact and they're like, how does that work? And we're like, it's not going to work for everyone. You can't use our model and go take it somewhere else. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that's where I have to tell them it's built on literally thousands of layers of what I call micro trust moments, where she trusts me and I trust her.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. Trust is important. Otherwise you can't tell the truth because they won't be able to handle it, So.
And that's a whole different conversation, right?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. That's the alliteration for the win. But right, and that brings up a whole nother conversation, Sam. Is that they're athletes, and I'm sure you've coached them. I know I have, where you tell them something, and it's like a denial. It's like they're in denial, and it's like, look, these are the facts. This is me, no sugar. I'm not buttering. Like, this is what it is. And they're just like, no, like, I'm better than that, or I'm this. And I'm like, but you're not. This is where you are. And I personally don't think you can ever truly make progress without first confronting in a very black and white fashion exactly where it is that you are, like, and accepting it, and not just being like, okay, this is where I am. No, I'm accepting I am here. This is where I am. Yes, I strive for this. I hope for this, but this is where I am. I'm curious. Have you had to have those conversations? I feel like you coach 800 athletes. Like just in my head, I tell people stories of like the lure of Sam Smith. Like, he coaches 3,800 athletes. Like, I don't know. That's just what I think.
Well, thanks, Micah, my hype man. I don't coach
tell everybody,
800
like,
athletes. So
who should I learn from? Sam Smith. He coaches 1,000 athletes.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it, but I don't. But yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think how would I word this? I think up front, as a coach, you want to be as honest and as objective as possible in your assessment of this client and where they're at, and trying to leverage data or results and be like, okay, this is where you are and you want to go way over here, so we got a lot of ground to cover. And if there is denial there, like, real quick side note, I have one of the coaches in my mentorship program. He had a client who wanted to start competing in CrossFit. He's been doing Ironmans for, I think, a few years, and now he wants to be in CrossFit. He weighs like 160 pounds, and he wants to qualify for Wadapalooza in like the intermediate or scale division or something. And he's very weak, doesn't move well, doesn't even really know the sport. Like, just the knowledge around the actual sport is just nil. And so this coach is asking me, okay, well then how do I look at this and approach this? And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, this guy needs like a dose of reality, as do you, on where he really is and how far away he is from this goal. And I was making an assumption, like, he just from my experience, he's so far away from what he wants. And he wanted to do within a year. And so I said, you know what you do? Just give him the events from the qualifier this year and have him do them. Yep. And then just look and go, okay, here's your scores, here's where you are. Like, the words you tell him, while he probably will believe you, because as a coach, your clients will always not always, but most of the time give you the benefit of the doubt. So if you say something, they will take it as truth, which is a very, it's a lot of responsibility. So you got to be very, responsible with that. But it's good to always check yourself with, objective data and just say, do these events. Let's look at the leaderboard. Okay, you're 1,000 spots away. You're not making that up probably in a year. Maybe, but probably not. So let's redefine this goal. So I think up front, before you've built those micro levels of trust over time, you want to be very upfront with people on their goals, the expectations of the goal and everything. And I think as I've gotten, the more I've been coaching, you get more confident to where you can just say it, and you're not afraid to have them run off and be like, well, I don't trust, or I don't believe that. I think I'm way better. And it's like, okay, then we probably aren't going to work well together. So best of luck to you. Now, over time, if you're withholding the truth from them, or you're not helping them have a clear sense of reality, in the sense of where they really sit relative to this goal and what are realistic expectations, then that's your fault as a coach, because you're setting them up for failure, because you're pulling a veil over their eyes. And then when the rubber meets the road, they don't do as well, or something blunders, and now they're shocked, but deep down you're not shocked because you knew they weren't there, and you pretty much just lied to them. So you got to start that relationship off with truth that can lead to more trust and alignment, and then ideally, as you get deeper in that relationship, you both know where you sit, and it allows, I guess, for a more enjoyable experience working with people. But I would say nowadays, just trying to really leverage objective data with people, because I don't want to be, that's why with that little story I gave, is I don't want to be the coach where I just tell somebody, well, you're not going to ever qualify for the games. I want them, and it comes back to my marriage thing. Like, you can't, and this is young married Sam advice for anyone out there. You can't blatantly tell your wife that they're wrong, or that's not correct. You cannot ever say that. You can't, because people hate being told they're wrong. You have to let them come to the realization that they're wrong, and you step back and you give them the space to notice it, and then they can fix it and upgrade themselves. It's the same with clients. But maybe I'm off. Maybe I need to be more of a hard ass. I don't know. But I'm just like, you know what? Do these tests, and then you can realize how far away you really are. And then it's like, all right, well, let's come up with a strategy now. I'll leave it at that.
A quick story to illustrate Sam's point. So Ashley and I, Ashley's my wife, we're in the process of and this was 2 years ago, in the process of getting married, and we're rehabbing this house, right, that we're going to ultimately live in. She's very handy. In fact, when the toilet needs unplunging, she actually does that in our relationship, because
nice.
I'm just not handy. So it's cool. I bring a lot of other things to the table. She just happens to be incredibly handy. For Christmas this year, she wanted a nail gun. So I mean, like, there's just people are different. I thought I was going to get killed, to be honest with you, but hey, it's okay. No, she wants to do this project downstairs in the basement where we work out. Cool. She doesn't want to pay someone to do it. That's great. Awesome. Love her. So we're rehabbing this house, right? And we're deciding on a paint color. And I was explaining to her, that, hey, I really like white. Like, I'm very basic. I'm very OCD. Lots of colors bother me. And in fact, you can go read this research. White is the only color that, when we look at it, our brain doesn't have to use really any computing power to process it. Even black, we have to use more computing power. So that's why cycle words are white. Okay, so that's a real fact. You can go look that up. And so she laughed at me. She's like, okay, whatever. We ended up painting our house white. It looks beautiful. I love it. I think about it every day of my life, that I don't have to use as much brain cells to process it. I know I'm weird. I admit that I'm weird. So upstairs, we were discussing the paint color, because it was like this beige color. Neither of us liked it. I thought it looked like throw up. Sorry if you have beige in your house. It was just, our beige looked like throw up. So she's like, I think I want to do a really light gray. And I was like, you know what? I disagree with that. But if it's really that important to you, go and buy, the tiny little cans. You can paint it on the wall like a 4x4 section, and let's do like 3 or 4 of them, and let's just decide together. So she agreed. She's very reasonable. So we did that. We did the white. We did like 3 or 4 grays. Well, I wanted the white, surprise, surprise, and she wanted this gray. I was like, hey, I don't think this is going to look good. Like, the tint's a little weird. I was like, it kind of looks a little purpley to me. She's like, no, this is what I want. This is great. She's like, the downstairs is all white. Like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, got it. I knew she was wrong. Okay, I knew this was going to look purple when it got up there because there's not a lot of natural light in there. It's going to look purple. It's going to look really dark. That's what happens when colors go in places with no natural light. They look darker than they are. That's exactly what happened. A year later, we're sitting at the dinner table. She goes, I want to repaint upstairs. I was like, what do you mean? You want to repaint upstairs? She goes, I hate it. She goes, I hate to say this even more. You were right. I was wrong. It looks purple. I think about it every time I go up there. I never want to go up there. I'm ashamed for our guests to stay up there. And to your point, you cannot tell your wife she's wrong. She has to come to it on her own, even if it means you spend thousands of dollars painting your house the wrong color. But I wanted to illustrate your point. That is correct, Sam. I believe in what you said wholeheartedly. And now I think about it every day. I'm like, and even in that moment, it took a lot of humility not to be like, I told you so. You were wrong. This is crappy purple color, right? But and you tend to learn that over time that it requires a lot of humility. It requires a lot of patience, which I lack. I'm aware. I'll raise my hand. And but you find more tactile ways to say things. And I think I always look at the things that I say to my clients, in my relationships, and I ask myself, could I have said that better? And sometimes it's not that I could have said it better, different words, but could I have said that in a tone? I get myself in trouble. That would have been more conducive to the outcome that I desired. So there you have it. I agree.
That's awesome. That's a good story.
Enough about marriage. On the last few minutes that I have you, I want to talk a little bit about the season. We got a equipment list. To everyone's surprise, there were kettlebells on there. I mean, look, I didn't really freak out. I'm sure you didn't freak out because I'm sure you're a good coach and your clients use kettlebells, and any good coach constantly practices a lot of things. So I was just like, okay, cool. We'll just put a little bit more emphasis on the time that we have on that, just in case. But I wasn't freaking out. But I'm curious, just thoughts on the equipment list in general, and then we'll kind of get into some season structure after that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, last year in the age group semifinals, they had kettlebells and legless rope climbs, even though the kettlebells were farmer carries, which was interesting. I mean, you look at the event, it's like, okay, I see what they were doing there, but you probably could have used them a little bit more, a little bit more creatively. But that's beside the point. So not surprised the kettlebells are in there. Legless rope climbs, I think, might come in as well. You never know. That could be in quarterfinals, which would be cool.
I agree with you.
The dumbbells are interesting. I know they used it again for the Masters, but they only used one, and it sounded like it was two. So the 70s and the 50s, that'll be interesting. But I mean, I like that they're adding things in that aren't barbell heavy. They're trying to, which makes sense with Boz. He tries to be more creative and broad with how he looks at testing and challenging people without just trying to murder people. Because I think that's an underlying piece of the former testing body was just like, who can handle the most? And if you can handle a lot, you're going to win. Whereas now it's, okay, who's that's really well-rounded and has really good skill acquisition and virtuosity amidst fatigue and a lot of difficulty, but not necessarily just a brute beatdown. So it'll be interesting to see how they integrate those tools. But yeah, like you said, if you're a coach worth your salt, you're probably utilizing those things throughout the year and not just a barbell. Because if you are just using a barbell, well, you need to rethink your thought process behind preparing for the sport and getting better at it.
What are your thoughts on, so CrossFit moves away from independent semifinals that are quite frankly independently run to at least here in the U.S. And maybe there's select parts of Europe that it's CrossFit run event where we're going to have standardized testing. What are your general thoughts on that?
I think it's great. It's like regionals again, but it's great
It
just from a standardization across the testing body. Which, if the sport's to continue becoming more legitimate and more profitable for athletes and taken more seriously, then there needs to be like standardization across the entire testing body. So having them control every stage of the competition, I think is great long term, and it's easier to look across all competitors and then be able to say, okay, this is where you're stacking up. This continent or region is a lot more capable than this one. I think it's a really good move. And to what you kind of mentioned there as well, if they're overseeing and structuring everything, then there's going to be like quality control because they do a really good job of everything they run is very professional. Everything, there's attention to detail. It's always really well run, and there's no room for error. Whereas if it's from some other organization or group and they don't have as many funds available, it's just sloppy and it doesn't look as good. And even as a coach, you just feel you're there and you're just like, this could be a lot better. So it's good that they're controlling a lot more because it is their sport and they ought to like make sure everything is as perfect as possible for the reputation and growth of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm very happy that they're going to really standardized testing. I think it makes a lot more sense because let's be honest, we'll just take North America, for example. Last year, it was 4 completely different tests. Completely different tests. Like not even kind of sort of close.
No.
It was crazy. And, I just think if the goal is to get the fittest, then it makes more sense for the test to be standardized. Like if we're going to decide to go away from that, like we're not going to crown the fittest, then I think there may be a world that exists that independent competitions make sense. But if because we always have to ask ourselves, at least in my estimation, what are we defining as success here? What are we trying to do out of the sport? And as far as I'm concerned and everyone else, it's to crown the fittest. So if the goal is to crown the fittest, standardized testing is obviously a necessity. The AFC and the NFC don't play different games of football. At least I don't think so.
Yep, exactly.
Right. So
yeah.
Let's say, most people probably listening to this are getting through the Open, right? They're in the top 10%. I like that they're bringing more purpose, I guess, and meaning back to the Open. Or at least I suppose we don't really have all the details on that in terms of the power rankings, but supposedly we're going to get some meaning to that. That's nice. So supposedly the guy or gal listening is getting past the 10% of the Open, and we'll call them a quote quarterfinal athlete. Let's just say that, and maybe their goal is to get as close as they can to the semifinals. They're in that kind of that bubble, if you will. How are you currently preparing athletes? And I know this is a broad question, but just in broad terms, how are you preparing athletes to, we'll call it peak, or to express their maximum potential during that time?
Yeah. Well, without spending an hour talking about that, because a lot of my clients are in that group, which is fun. Like I have a lot of people in the top 500, so like top 200 to 500 in North America. I have a lot of people there, and then I've quite a few below that in Europe. So it's fun trying to get a lot of them closer to semifinals. Some of them this year it's like a year to qualify, and then some of them it's a year to get even closer, like right on the precipice of getting a spot.
Yep.
So I guess, okay, let me think about this. Like, what would be the broad, like the very zoomed out piece here? The very zoomed out piece would be each year the overall training, and then the overall structuring of the training is getting more. I don't want to say difficult, but it's building upon itself. So maybe that's a better way of looking at it. Each year, everything they're doing is building upon the previous year. So there should be a very clear delineation between 2021's training in the off season and 2022's off season training. 2021's in season training, 2022's off season. So I'm really a big proponent for very clear building and progression of training upon years and years of work. So if that's not evident, if somebody looked at the designs, then it's hard for me to say, okay, then the training is progressively getting them better and better. Because to your point or your question, they need to be doing more or more challenging work each year to better put themselves in a position to do more challenging preparatory work for the actual competition. Because that's how I think about it as well, is each year the preparatory phase needs to look more and more like it would need to for somebody who was